The courthouse stood tall against the morning sky, its sandstone walls worn by decades of arguments, verdicts, and memories etched into its very foundation. Inside, the air was heavy, filled with the faint scent of polished wood, paper, and nervous anticipation. It was supposed to be an ordinary custody hearing, one of many that the judge presided over each week. Yet the tension was anything but ordinary. Every face in the room betrayed the weight of unspoken fears and stubborn truths waiting to be revealed. At the plaintiff's table, Sarah Mitchell sat rigid, her hands clasping a tissue that had long since shredded under her grip. She was a young mother, worn thin by months of battling for custody of her daughter, 3-year-old Lily. Her eyes were weary, the kind of weary that comes not only from sleepless nights, but from the constant need to stay strong in the face of relentless opposition. Across the aisle, her ex-partner's attorney whispered aggressively into his client's ear, their eyes darting toward Sarah with a mixture of disdain and calculation. Sarah inhaled deeply and looked toward the bench where Judge Raymond Holloway adjusted his glasses and scanned the paperwork before him. Known for his fairness, the judge was also known for his piercing ability to cut through fabricated stories. His presence alone was enough to silence a noisy courtroom. He lifted his gaze briefly toward Sarah, then toward the defense, before returning to the documents. Lily sat beside her mother, her little legs swinging freely under the chair. She clutched her teddy bear with one arm, her other hand picking absent-mindedly at a loose thread on her pink dress. To her, this was not a battlefield. It was just another room with too many strangers staring. She didn't understand the whispers, the tension, or the stakes that weighed so heavily upon her mother. What she did understand, however, was that something important was about to happen. The case had already been dragging on for months. Allegations of neglect, disputes over living conditions, and questions of character had filled previous hearings. Yet no testimony seemed to decisively tilt the case. Witnesses contradicted one another, lawyers twisted facts into narratives, and the truth remained foggy. That morning, both sides prepared for more of the same, another grueling session of back-and-forth claims. No one expected that the most crucial voice would come from the smallest person in the room. The courtroom murmurs died down as the bailiff called for order. Judge Holloway spoke with a calm, steady tone. "We are here to hear closing testimonies regarding custody of the minor child, Lily Mitchell. Both sides will be given the opportunity to present final remarks. However, given certain developments, the court has considered an unusual but necessary measure." He paused, letting the gravity of his words sink in. "A child may be asked a simple, limited set of questions. The court will ensure they are age-appropriate and that her comfort is prioritized." Gasps rippled through the courtroom. A child as young as 3 rarely testified in such matters. Attorneys on both sides leaned forward, exchanging looks of shock. The defense attorney shot up immediately. "Your Honor, with all due respect, this is highly irregular. A child of that age cannot reliably contribute to legal proceedings. This will prejudice the case unfairly." The judge adjusted his glasses again, unfazed. "Ordinarily, I would agree. But given the inconsistencies presented by both parties and the direct involvement of law enforcement on the night in question, the court believes the child may provide clarity. Her words will not be taken as evidence in the strictest sense, but will be considered in assessing credibility." Sarah's heart pounded. She placed a gentle hand on Lily's shoulder. "It's okay, sweetheart," she whispered, her voice trembling yet soothing. "Just remember, you can say what you saw. That's all anyone wants." Lily looked up with wide, innocent eyes. To her, telling the truth wasn't complicated. It wasn't about strategy, winning, or losing. It was about remembering the evening when her world had briefly collided with flashing lights, shouting voices, and a dog with a shiny badge who had made her giggle despite the chaos. The defense attorney rolled his eyes. clearly preparing to object again, but the judge silenced him with a firm glance. This court will not tolerate interruptions. The child will answer only a few questions under my supervision. Counsel may observe but may not directly address her. The bailiff brought a smaller chair forward, placing it near the witness stand, but not on it, to make the experience less intimidating. Lily's teddy bear was allowed to come with her, a small comfort in a sea of formality. She shuffled forward, her little shoes tapping softly against the wooden floor, her tiny frame dwarfed by the towering furniture and the serious faces around her. The courtroom grew eerily quiet. Even the rustle of papers ceased as all eyes fixed on the little girl climbing into the oversized chair. She hugged her bear tightly, blinking at the unfamiliar spotlight. Judge Holloway leaned forward, softening his tone. "Hello, Lily. How are you today?" "I'm okay," she said in a small but steady voice. "That's good," the judge replied kindly. "I just want to ask you a couple of questions. Can you tell me about the night when the police came near your house?" Lily tilted her head, her curls bouncing slightly. She looked down at her bear, as though drawing courage from it. The adults held their breath, unsure of what might come out. Her mother silently prayed, while the defense team braced for something they could dismiss as nonsense. Then Lily spoke. "I saw a big doggy," she said, her eyes lighting up. "He had a badge, and he found the bad man." The courtroom erupted in whispers. Sarah gasped softly, her hand flying to her mouth. Officers in uniform, seated quietly in the back, exchanged startled glances. That detail hadn't been shared publicly. Only those present during the actual raid knew about Rex, the police canine who had tracked the suspect through a dark alley and cornered him before officers made the arrest. The judge's eyes narrowed with interest. "A dog with a badge, you say?" Lily nodded enthusiastically. "Yes. His name is Rex." He sniffed and then barked loud. Then the police came and took the bad man away. The defense attorney leapt to his feet, objecting furiously. "Your Honor, this is absurd. She's 3 years old. Children make up stories about animals all the time. This cannot be considered credible testimony." But the officers in the back stood straighter, their expressions solemn. They knew she wasn't inventing a story. She had witnessed something real, something only they, and now this little girl, could describe. Judge Holloway silenced the uproar with a sharp rap of his gavel. His voice was calm, but carried weight. "Order. This child has just provided information consistent with verified police records that were not made public. The court will take this into serious consideration." Sarah felt tears welling up. For the first time in months, she felt the tide turning in her favor. She hadn't coached Lily. She hadn't needed to. Her daughter's innocence was her greatest strength, and in that moment, it cut through layers of lies, strategies, and manipulations like sunlight breaking through storm clouds. The defense attorney sank back into his chair, his face pale. His client shifted uncomfortably, realizing the fortress of arguments he had built was crumbling, not by the prosecution's eloquence, but by the unfiltered honesty of a child. The room buzzed with energy. Spectators whispered in disbelief, reporters scribbled frantically, and the jury members exchanged wide-eyed glances. A simple testimony from a 3-year-old had just shaken the foundations of a case that had seemed endless. And Lily, unaware of the storm she had unleashed, smiled as she hugged her teddy tighter, swinging her little legs beneath the chair. To her, she had simply told the truth about the brave doggy with a badge who had saved the day. For everyone else, it was the beginning of something extraordinary. The courtroom was silent at first, so still that the creak of the ceiling fan above could be heard echoing faintly against the high walls. All eyes rested on the small figure perched nervously in the oversized chair. Lily shifted, clutching her teddy bear so tightly that its button eye seemed ready to pop loose. She looked uncertain, glancing first at her mother and then at the serious faces surrounding her. To a 3-year-old, the world was still simple, yet here she sat in the middle of one of its most complex settings. The judge's voice softened again, coaxing her gently. "You're doing very well, Lily. Can you tell me what you saw when the police came that night?" The question seemed heavy for such tiny shoulders, but Lily blinked her wide eyes and thought hard. She wrinkled her nose the way she often did when recalling something important. Then her lips parted, and in a small but steady voice, she spoke. "I saw a big doggy," she said clearly. The words carried across the room like a ripple on still water. At first, there was confusion. A child's mention of a dog hardly seemed extraordinary. Some jurors leaned back, assuming her answer was harmless and perhaps irrelevant. But before anyone could dismiss it, Lily continued. "He had a shiny badge," she added with a spark of excitement. "And he found the bad man." That was the moment when the air changed. Gasps broke out in the gallery. Sarah's breath caught in her throat as she instinctively reached for her daughter's hand. The defense attorney straightened sharply, his chair scraping against the floor. The prosecutor's pen froze mid-scribble. Even Judge Holloway, known for his unshakable composure, paused in surprise. The defense lawyer was the first to react. He leapt to his feet, his voice slicing through the murmurs. "Objection, Your Honor. This is nonsense. She's a toddler. Are we to believe she can identify criminals now?" But the objection sounded more desperate than authoritative, because in the back of the courtroom, the police officers who had been quietly observing sat up straighter, their expressions hardening. They exchanged glances, silently confirming what they all knew. Rex, the department's K-9, had been instrumental in the arrest that night. His involvement had never been disclosed to the public for tactical reasons. Yet here was a 3-year-old child describing him with uncanny accuracy. Judge Holloway raised his hand to silence the clamor. His tone remained calm but firm. "Order. Counsel, sit down." He then turned his attention back to Lily, lowering his voice again. "Can you tell me a little more about the dog, sweetheart? What did he do?" Lily's face brightened, her fear momentarily forgotten. "He sniffed and sniffed," she said, mimicking with her nose. Giggles scattered lightly in the audience, though most remained riveted. "Then he barked really loud. And then the police ran and got the bad man hiding by the fence. The doggy was so smart." Sarah felt her eyes sting with tears. She hadn't known her daughter remembered so vividly. She recalled that night herself, the chaos, the flashing lights, the shouts from officers echoing through the street. She had pulled Lily inside quickly, hoping to shield her. Yet children notice more than adults think. Lily had noticed the very detail that mattered most. The prosecutor leaned forward, seizing the moment. "Your Honor, this child's statement directly aligns with police activity from that night. We can corroborate this with officers present." The defense attorney slammed his hand on the table, his voice strained. "Your Honor, she's parroting something her mother told her. This is clearly coached testimony, designed to elicit sympathy." But the officers were already shifting, one of them rising respectfully to address the court. "Permission to speak, Your Honor," said Officer Daniels, a veteran of the force with 30 years of service. His deep voice carried weight. "The child's description matches exactly what happened. Rex, our K-9, located the suspect hiding by a fence. Only personnel on scene knew about it." A buzz of disbelief spread through the courtroom. The jury exchanged startled looks, and even some of the spectators gasped audibly. The defense attorney's face drained of color. His carefully crafted argument that the suspect had been miles away at the time now seemed paper-thin. Judge Holloway leaned back slowly, tapping his gavel once for silence. "Thank you, officer. The record will note the confirmation." He turned back to Lily with a gentle smile. You're very brave, young lady. You've helped us understand something very important today. Lily beamed, swinging her legs as though she'd just received the highest compliment imaginable. She had no idea her innocent testimony was dismantling an entire legal strategy. To her, she had only told the truth about her hero dog. Meanwhile, the defense team huddled, whispering furiously. Their client looked pale, beads of sweat forming on his forehead. For weeks, they had argued he wasn't present, that the accusations were exaggerated. Now, a 3-year-old child had unknowingly provided the one piece of information that not only contradicted his alibi, but matched official reports, word for word. Sarah watched, her heart pounding, tears threatening to spill. She squeezed her daughter's hand gently. For the first time in months, she felt hope swelling within her chest. She hadn't told Lily about Rex, hadn't dared to share such details, and now the truth was shining through her daughter's innocent words. The judge finally addressed the courtroom. This child's account will not be dismissed lightly. What she has shared aligns with verified police records. While the court will take care not to overburden her words, they cannot be ignored. The defense attorney tried one last desperate move. Your Honor, even if she did see a police dog, her interpretation of events cannot be considered reliable. Children invent stories, give dogs magical powers, misremember. Enough, the judge interrupted firmly. His gaze was unwavering. This isn't invention. This is confirmation of facts already in evidence. The child's words, while simple, carry weight precisely because they are unfiltered. The prosecutor leaned back, hiding a small smile. He knew the case had just shifted dramatically. Jurors who had been undecided now looked at Lily with softened expressions, their doubt replaced with quiet conviction. The bailiff eventually escorted Lily back to her mother, allowing her to sit down with her teddy once more. Sarah wrapped her arm around her daughter, whispering, "You are so brave, sweetheart. Mommy is proud of you." Lily only giggled, burying her face into her bear. For her, the moment had been simple. She had spoken of what she saw, a big, brave dog with a badge who saved the day. She didn't know that her innocent truth had struck like a lightning bolt through the courtroom, cutting away deception and changing everything. By the time the session paused for recess, the gallery buzzed with disbelief and awe. Reporters rushed to phone their editors, eager to file a story no one would believe until they read it in print. Officers exchanged knowing nods, proud of their four-legged partner whose loyalty extended even into the courtroom. And in the quietest corner of that room, Sarah held her daughter close, silently thanking the heavens. For once, truth hadn't been buried under legal maneuvers or clever lies. It had come shining through the pure voice of a child, and nothing would ever be the same again. The courtroom was tense after Lily's first words about Rex. While many adults exchanged skeptical glances, others leaned forward, curious and uncertain how much weight a child's memory could carry. Sarah sat nervously, clutching her daughter's small hand. Lily's wide eyes, fixed on the judge, glimmered with the kind of honesty only a 3-year-old could display. Judge Holloway's voice softened. "Lily, can you tell us more about what happened when the police came that night?" Lily wriggled slightly, hugging her teddy bear. "The doggy was really big. He had a shiny badge," she said carefully. "And he found the bad man hiding." The room froze. Murmurs spread quietly at first, then grew louder. Several jurors blinked in disbelief. The defense attorney's face tightened, while the prosecutor leaned forward, sensing the importance of her words. "Objection." The defense attorney suddenly shouted, "Your Honor, this is preposterous. She is a 3-year-old child. Her account is not credible. Children imagine things, they don't testify to facts." Judge Holloway raised a hand, silencing the objection. Sustained in tone, "But the child may continue." Her account is not dismissed merely because of her age. Lily's tiny lips formed a determined line. The doggy sniffed. He sniffed and sniffed, and then he barked really loud. Then the police ran and got the bad man by the fence. He was hiding. The jurors sat in rapt attention. Their skeptical expressions softened as they realized the child wasn't embellishing. She wasn't being coached. Her words were vivid and specific, describing actions, locations, and sequences that only someone present could know. The prosecutor leaned forward. "Your Honor, the child's testimony aligns exactly with the police report. Rex, the canine, located the suspect in that location. The child is recounting events she witnessed firsthand." The defense attorney's jaw tightened. Even so, children repeat phrases they hear from adults. "There's no proof she wasn't prompted or coached, Your Honor." Sarah's eyes flashed, and she spoke firmly, surprising even herself. "I never told her about the dog or the arrest. She remembers what she saw." "That's it," the judge nodded solemnly. "We will consider her testimony in context, and the jury will weigh it carefully." Officer Daniels, sitting quietly in the back, shifted slightly. His expression was unreadable, but he gave a subtle nod to his colleagues. He knew that Lily's description was remarkably accurate, a child's words coinciding perfectly with the police operation that night. The defense attorney continued, attempting to plant seeds of doubt. "Children have wild imaginations. How do we know she isn't simply inventing this? A toddler's description of events is inherently unreliable," the prosecutor countered, calm and methodical. "Counselor, let us look at the facts." Lily described a dog wearing a badge. She described the exact location of the suspect. Her account of the sequence of events matches the officer's timeline exactly. No one outside the police and her mother could have known these details. Her testimony is corroborated by evidence. Several jurors shifted in their seats, whispering softly to each other. The air in the room felt charged, as though a quiet but powerful current of truth had suddenly entered the proceedings. Lily's voice, small but unwavering, continued. "He was brave. The doggy found the bad man before anyone else. Then everyone clapped, and the police hugged him. Even hardened court officers felt a lump rise in their throats. The description was not just accurate, it carried the innocence and clarity of a child witnessing events as they unfolded." The defense attorney's arguments began to feel flimsy in comparison. The judge paused for a moment, surveying the room. The court notes the specificity and spontaneity of the child's testimony. While unusual, it is not to be dismissed outright. The prosecutor leaned closer to the jury. "Please consider this. This child saw exactly what happened. Her memory, her honesty, and her vivid account give us insight that adult witnesses could not replicate." Officer Torres, Rex's handler, raised a hand slightly from the back. "Your Honor, if I may?" Judge Holloway gestured. "You may." Torres spoke clearly, his voice resonant. "The child's description of Rex is accurate. She described his actions, his behavior, even the location of the suspect. There was nothing rehearsed about her account. It is remarkable in its precision." The defense attorney frowned, his hands clenching the table. His strategy of dismissing Lily's words as fantasy was crumbling. Lily smiled shyly, unaware of the weight her words carried. "Rex is really smart," she said softly. "He always finds the bad guys." The courtroom, once skeptical, was leaning in. Even the jury, previously cautious, could not ignore the clarity and sincerity of a child's perspective. The prosecutor concluded, his voice calm but persuasive. "Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, sometimes truth comes in the smallest of packages. This child has told you what she saw. We ask you to consider her words seriously. They are consistent, specific, and most importantly, true." The defense attorney sank back into his chair, defeated for the moment. He glanced at his client, who looked pale and anxious, realizing that the narrative was slipping beyond control. As the session recessed, the gallery buzzed quietly with whispers. Sarah hugged Lily close, whispering, "You were so brave, sweetheart." Lily hugged back, holding her teddy tight. "I just told the truth, Mommy." And in that moment, it became clear to everyone present. The story of a little girl and a police dog had begun to change everything. The courtroom would never be the same, and the defense's confidence was already cracking under the weight of innocence aligned perfectly with fact. The defense attorney rose quickly, his face flushed red with urgency. His chair skidded back, scraping against the polished floor in a noise that made several jurors wince. He straightened his suit jacket and adjusted his tie, though his composure had already started to slip. "Your Honor," he began, his voice sharper than intended, "this testimony cannot be taken seriously. She is 3 years old, a toddler. Her account is nothing more than childish imagination. Children invent stories about animals every day. She has described a dog with a badge. What's next, a talking horse?" The courtroom stirred, some suppressing chuckles, others narrowing their eyes at his obvious attempt to belittle the child. Judge Holloway tapped his gavel once, the sound cutting cleanly through the whispers. "That will do, Counselor. You will speak respectfully of this witness. Regardless of her age, she is entitled to the same dignity as anyone who sits before this court." The attorney pressed his lips together, nodding stiffly. "With respect, Your Honor, the law does not consider a 3-year-old capable of reliable testimony." But before the judge could respond, the prosecutor rose, his voice calm but firm. "Then let us consider, Your Honor, how her words align precisely with verified events." The child described a K-9 officer locating the suspect near a fence. Those details match police reports that have never been disclosed publicly. The defense argues imagination, but imagination does not reproduce facts known only to law enforcement. The jury leaned forward. Every set of eyes turned toward the officers seated along the back wall. They shifted uncomfortably, their loyalty to justice pulling them forward. Finally, Officer Daniels stood once again, his hat in hand. His voice carried weight, tempered by decades in uniform. "Your Honor, I confirm under oath that our K-9 Rex located the suspect by a wooden fence on the east side of the property. The child's statement is entirely accurate. No details of Rex's involvement were released outside official channels." Silence gripped the room. Even the defense attorney faltered, caught between rebuttal and resignation. His client turned pale, tugging at his collar as though the walls themselves were closing in. The judge's face remained neutral, but his eyes revealed thoughtfulness, even gravity. This court takes note of the officer's confirmation. The child's testimony cannot be dismissed as fantasy when it aligns with confidential police reports. The defense lawyer sputtered, searching for ground. "Your Honor, with all due respect, children overhear things. A mother could have told her." Sarah shot up, her voice trembling but firm. "I never did. I never said a word to her about Rex. I didn't even know the dog's name until just now." Her hand clutched Lily's protectively, tears welling in her eyes. She remembered what she saw. That's all. Her sincerity pierced the air. The jurors looked at her, then back at Lily, who sat swinging her legs without a care, humming softly to herself, as though the storm swirling around her wasn't real. The prosecutor seized the moment. "Your Honor, the defense seeks to dismiss what is inconvenient. But facts cannot be brushed away simply because they come from an unlikely source. Sometimes truth is clearest through innocence." The defense attorney slammed his file shut, exhaling hard. He knew the momentum was slipping from his grasp. But desperation breeds persistence, and he wasn't ready to surrender. If the court insists on considering this child's statement, then let us examine credibility properly. Children misinterpret. She may have seen a dog, yes, but perhaps it was a neighbor's pet, or perhaps she imagined the badge. "This is dangerous precedent, Your Honor. Dangerous indeed." The judge regarded him coolly. "What is dangerous, counselor, is ignoring a voice simply because it is small. This court has weighed witnesses who lied under oath, experts whose opinions swayed like the wind, and yet we are quick to dismiss a child who has no reason to deceive? I will not permit that." The words landed like a hammer blow. The defense attorney sank slowly back into his chair, his jaw tight, his hands fiddling with his pen until it snapped between his fingers. The sound echoed louder than expected, a fitting metaphor for the cracks forming in his case. The jurors, meanwhile, were captivated. They weren't merely hearing arguments anymore. They were watching truth unravel lies in real time. Some leaned forward, their eyes softening whenever they glanced at Lily, who now whispered to her teddy bear, as though confiding a secret only he could keep. The prosecutor rose again, pacing deliberately before the jury box. "Ladies and gentlemen, you have just witnessed something rare in this courtroom. Not rehearsed speeches, not crafted arguments, but the unfiltered truth from a child who saw with her own eyes. The defense would have you believe this was invention, yet the officers confirm otherwise. Ask yourselves, which seems more likely, that a 3-year-old constructed a perfect fiction, or that she simply told the truth?" The defense objected to the theatrics, but the judge allowed it. The jurors nodded, some slowly, some decisively. By recess, the mood had shifted dramatically. The defense's earlier confidence had withered, replaced by visible cracks. Their client sat hunched, avoiding eye contact, knowing the walls were closing in. The prosecution, though cautious, carried a spark of hope not felt before. And in the midst of it all, Lily giggled softly, tugging at her mother's sleeve. "Mommy, can Rex come play with me after this?" she whispered innocently. Sarah smiled through her tears, stroking her daughter's hair. "Maybe, sweetheart, maybe." The innocence of the request contrasted so sharply with the gravity of the moment that even hardened officers in the gallery swallowed hard, reminded of what justice truly meant. The truth had been spoken, not by eloquent attorneys or seasoned witnesses, but by a child with nothing to gain and nothing to hide. And everyone knew the defense's carefully constructed wall had begun to crumble. The morning session had already left the courtroom buzzing with disbelief. During recess, whispers filled the hallways. Reporters hurried to draft breaking headlines, and jurors exchanged quiet glances that betrayed their shifting thoughts. By the time everyone returned, there was a different air in the room, charged, expectant, as though something extraordinary was about to happen. The prosecution had requested to introduce a piece of demonstrative evidence. Rex, the police K-9 who had become the unlikely centerpiece of the case. At first, the idea seemed outrageous to the defense. They objected furiously, arguing that parading a dog before the jury was nothing but theatrics. But Judge Holloway, after a long pause, ruled carefully. Given the relevance of the child's testimony and the confirmation from law enforcement, the court will allow the introduction of the K-9. The jury may consider the dog's presence only as it relates to credibility and identification. The defense attorney muttered under his breath, defeated for the moment. His client rubbed his temples, pale and agitated. Across the aisle, Sarah clutched Lily's hand tightly, uncertain what to expect, but trusting that the truth had already begun to reveal itself. The bailiff opened the side door, and in he came. Rex padded confidently into the courtroom, his sleek black and tan coat gleaming under the fluorescent lights. His handler walked beside him, holding the leash with a steady hand, but Rex carried himself like he belonged there. His ears pricked forward, his nose twitching at the sense of the room. Though trained for serious work, he radiated calm strength, as if he knew his presence meant more today than any mission he had ever carried out. The moment Lily saw him, her entire face lit up. She gasped, leapt from her seat and shouted in pure delight, "Rex!" The name rang out with such innocence and certainty that the entire courtroom froze. The jurors looked at each other in disbelief. The judge leaned back slowly, his lips pressed into a thoughtful line. The defense attorney's jaw dropped, his pen sliding from his fingers. Rex's ears perked at the sound of his name, and his tail wagged gently. He pulled slightly on the leash, eager to greet the small voice that had called him. Lily clapped her hands, giggling. "That's the doggy with the badge. Mommy, that's him." She bounced with excitement, her teddy bear momentarily forgotten. The handler looked to the judge for permission. Judge Holloway gave a small nod, and Rex was guided gently toward the front where Lily sat. As he approached, Lily hopped down from her chair and stretched her arms wide. Rex sniffed her carefully, then wagged his tail furiously, nuzzling her with affection as though recognizing her too. The jury softened visibly, their expressions melting from skepticism into quiet awe. The prosecutor seized the moment. "Your Honor, I ask the court to note the child's spontaneous identification of Rex. She was not prompted. She recognized him instantly." The defense attorney scrambled to recover. "Objection. This is nothing more than showmanship. A child gets excited at the sight of any dog. This does not prove anything about the facts of the case." But his words lacked force. Everyone had seen the sincerity of Lily's reaction. It was not the generic delight of a child seeing a random animal. It was recognition, connection, and memory. The judge overruled calmly. "The court will consider the circumstances." The child's response appeared genuine and uncoached. Lily crouched to pat Rex's head, giggling as he licked her hand. "Good boy," she whispered, stroking his ears. The sight was disarming. Hardened officers in the gallery found themselves swallowing lumps in their throats. Some jurors smiled faintly despite the gravity of the case. Even the court reporter paused briefly, her fingers hovering over the keys, caught in the humanity of the moment. Sarah wiped a tear from her cheek, overwhelmed. This was the moment she hadn't dared to hope for. Her daughter, without pressure, had confirmed the truth more convincingly than any lawyer ever could. The prosecutor continued, "Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, this is not theater. This is a child recognizing the very canine who carried out the act she described. She has no reason to lie, and she could not have invented this recognition." The defense attorney rose once more, his voice shaking slightly. "Your Honor, this is dangerous. The jury is being swayed by emotion, not facts. We cannot allow a case to be decided by a child's excitement over an animal." Judge Holloway's gaze was steady. "What sways the jury is their decision, Counselor. What we have here is corroboration, not performance." The handler gave Rex a gentle command, and the dog sat obediently beside Lily, tail thumping against the floor. Lily sat cross-legged beside him, her arms wrapped around his neck. She looked up at the judge with the simplicity only a child could carry. "He's my friend," she said softly. The entire courtroom seemed to exhale at once. The jurors were visibly moved. Some leaned back, struggling to compose themselves, but the impression was already made. They weren't just watching a legal battle anymore, they were witnessing truth emerge through the bond between a child and a dog. The defense attorney slumped into his chair, his face gray. His client buried his head in his hands. The prosecution's path forward now gleamed brighter than ever. As Rex was gently led back toward the side door, Lily waved enthusiastically. "Bye, Rex. You're the best doggy," she called out, her voice echoing through the chamber. Rex gave one final wag of his tail before disappearing behind the door. The courtroom fell into silence again, but it was a different silence than before. This one was heavy with realization, with the unspoken acknowledgement that something profound had just happened. The judge cleared his throat, breaking the spell. The jury will disregard emotional sentiment. What matters is the accuracy and credibility of testimony. And yet, it is clear that this child's account cannot be dismissed. As the session adjourned for the day, the gallery erupted in hushed conversations. Reporters raced for the exits, their stories already writing themselves. Officers nodded to each other, proud of their canine partner. And Sarah knelt beside Lily, hugging her tight. "You were wonderful, sweetheart," she whispered, her voice breaking. Lily just smiled, her innocence untouched by the magnitude of what had unfolded. "Rex is so smart, Mommy. He always finds the bad guys." For Sarah, for the jurors, for everyone in that room, the meaning was deeper. Rex had not only found a suspect. Together with Lily, he had found the truth. And truth, once unleashed, was impossible to put back on a leash. The day after Rex's unforgettable appearance, the courtroom was more crowded than ever. Reporters jostled for space, their cameras flashing as though history was being written in real time. Word had spread about the 3-year-old girl who had named a police dog in court, and the atmosphere felt electric, as if everyone was holding their breath for what would follow. The prosecution wasted no time. They called their next witness, Dr. Emily Carter, a seasoned forensic analyst with 2 decades of experience. She walked to the stand with calm assurance, her white lab coat replaced by a tailored suit, her hands steady as she was sworn in. "Dr. Carter," the prosecutor began, "can you tell the court about your involvement in the investigation?" "Yes," she replied confidently. "I supervised the collection and analysis of physical evidence from the crime scene. This included trace materials, footprints, and scent samples used by K9 units during the search." The defense attorney leaned back in his chair, arms crossed, attempting to look unimpressed. But his eyes betrayed unease. The prosecutor stepped closer. "Dr. Carter, the child witness described Rex, the canine, finding the suspect near a wooden fence. Did your analysis support this claim?" Dr. Carter adjusted her glasses, glancing briefly at the jury before continuing. "Yes, at the location described, an old wooden fence at the eastern edge of the property, we recovered footprints matching the defendant's shoes. Additionally, fibers from his jacket were found snagged on the fence. DNA testing confirmed the fibers belonged to the defendant." A collective gasp rippled through the room. The jurors sat straighter, their pens flying across notebooks. Sarah squeezed Lily's hand under the table, her heart racing. Even Lily seemed to sense the importance, leaning forward with wide, curious eyes. The prosecutor's tone sharpened. "Dr. Carter, to be clear, did these findings emerge from areas identified by Rex, the K9? "Yes," she confirmed. "Rex alerted officers to the precise location. Without his signal, we might not have discovered those fibers at all. His accuracy led us directly to critical evidence." The defense attorney sprang to his feet. "Objection. This is nothing more than hero worship of a dog. Dogs cannot testify. They cannot understand truth or lies. To attribute forensic discoveries to an animal is absurd." The judge raised a hand. "Your objection is noted, counselor. But the witness is not attributing guilt to the animal. She is describing the process by which evidence was found. That is admissible." The attorney sat down hard, muttering under his breath. His client fidgeted, tugging nervously at his cufflinks, his face pale. Dr. Carter pressed on. "I would also like to add," she said, "that the child's description of Rex locating the suspect by that fence matches the sequence of events exactly. This was not publicly disclosed. The probability of her inventing this with such precision is statistically negligible." The prosecutor smiled faintly, turning toward the jury. "So the testimony of a 3-year-old child was consistent with scientific evidence collected at the scene?" "Yes," Dr. Carter said firmly. "Entirely consistent." The jury's faces told the story. Doubt was slipping further and further away. The defense tried to recover, launching into cross-examination. "Dr. Carter, isn't it possible the child overheard details from officers or her mother?" She shook her head. "Not unless someone leaked confidential reports." These findings were sealed until weeks after her statement. "Perhaps she was coached," the attorney pressed. Dr. Carter's tone sharpened. "Counselor, I have testified in dozens of cases. Coaching produces rehearsed, rigid responses. What I observed in this child was spontaneous recognition. You cannot fake the joy of a 3-year-old calling out a dog's name." The jury chuckled softly at her bluntness, and even Judge Holloway allowed the corner of his mouth to twitch. When Dr. Carter finally stepped down, the prosecution called the next witness, Officer Miguel Torres, Rex's handler. His crisp uniform, straight posture, and calm demeanor commanded respect the moment he entered. "Officer Torres," the prosecutor began, "tell us about Rex's training." Torres nodded. "Rex has been a certified police canine for 6 years. He's trained in tracking, narcotics detection, and suspect apprehension. He has led to the recovery of evidence in over 50 cases, and his accuracy rate is among the highest in our department." The prosecutor leaned closer. "And on the night in question, what role did Rex play?" Torres spoke clearly, his voice steady. "Rex tracked the suspect's scent to the eastern fence. He alerted by sitting and pawing at the ground. That signal told us to search closely. We found fibers from the defendant's jacket stuck to the wood. Later, footprints confirmed his presence." "And was this information disclosed publicly?" "No, sir. It was part of our sealed investigation file. Only the officers present and forensic staff knew." The courtroom murmured again, and the defense attorney was visibly sweating. The prosecutor let the silence hang before asking, "So when the child said, 'The dog with the badge found the bad man by the fence,' was she correct?" "Completely correct," Torres said. He glanced at Lily, offering a warm smile. "She told the truth," Lily giggled, hiding behind her teddy bear. The jury melted once again at the sight, their notebooks momentarily forgotten. The defense attempted a half-hearted cross-examination, but could not shake Torres. Every answer was confident, backed by years of experience. By the time the afternoon sun streamed through the tall windows, the prosecution had built an unshakable chain. A child's innocent words, a dog's skilled nose, and science's cold, undeniable proof. The judge called for recess, but the weight of the evidence lingered. Reporters sprinted for the exits, headlines already forming. Child's testimony matches forensic proof case tightens around defendant. As the courtroom emptied, Sarah knelt beside Lily. "You see, sweetheart? The truth always comes out." Lily smiled brightly. "I knew Rex was smart, Mommy. He always finds things." She hugged her teddy tightly, unaware of how her little voice had become the linchpin in a battle for justice. Across the room, the defendant sat hunched, his attorney whispering furiously in his ear. But the man's eyes were vacant, hollow. The walls were closing in, and he knew it. For all his lawyer's clever words, for all the strategies and objections, he was being undone by a child's memory, a dog's loyalty, and the relentless certainty of science. And everyone in that room could feel it. The tide had turned, and there would be no turning back. The defendant had grown quieter with each passing day, his shoulders hunched, his eyes darting nervously, as though every sound in the courtroom might be the echo of a cell door slamming shut. But his attorney, though visibly worn, had not given up. He stood at the podium now, clutching his notes like a lifeline, preparing to deliver what might be his final desperate attempt to salvage a sinking case. "Ladies and gentlemen of the jury," he began, forcing a smile that never reached his eyes, "we must not lose sight of one simple truth. The burden of proof rests with the prosecution. My client sits here presumed innocent until proven guilty beyond a reasonable doubt." He paced before the jury box, his voice growing louder with each step. The prosecution has dazzled you with theatrics. A child on the witness stand. A dog paraded through this courtroom. Emotional displays designed to tug at your hearts. But is this justice? Or is it manipulation? The jurors watched him closely. Some leaned back, arms crossed, skeptical. Others tilted their heads, curious to see where he was going. The child, he continued, gesturing toward Lily, is 3 years old. 3. Barely old enough to form complete sentences, let alone recall complex events. She has a vivid imagination, as all children do. You heard her yourself, calling the dog her friend. Sweet, yes, but hardly legal proof. Are we truly to decide a man's fate on the words of a toddler? Lily, sitting with her teddy bear clutched tight, whispered something to her mother. Sarah bent down, listened, and then hugged her daughter, her eyes brimming with tears. The defense attorney pressed forward, sensing the room's unease. And the dog Rex, an admirable animal, no doubt, but still an animal. He cannot testify. He cannot tell you what he smelled, what he saw, or what he thought. His handler interprets his behavior, but interpretation is not fact. The prosecution wants you to believe Rex pointed to guilt. But what if he was simply following the strongest scent? What if the evidence he led to was planted or coincidental? Gasps rippled through the gallery. The defense attorney held up a hand. I'm not accusing the officers of wrongdoing, but mistakes happen. Dogs make errors. Evidence can be contaminated. That's why we rely on science, not stories. He stopped pacing and leaned heavily on the podium, lowering his voice for effect. Science, yes. The prosecution paraded a forensic expert before you, claiming fibers and footprints tied my client to a fence. But how many times have we seen forensic evidence misinterpreted? Fibers could transfer by accident. Footprints could belong to anyone wearing the same brand of shoes. Is it proof beyond a reasonable doubt, or is it just another coincidence the state wants to inflate into certainty? The jurors scribbled notes, their expressions unreadable. The defense attorney's voice grew more urgent, almost pleading. Coincidence, ladies and gentlemen. That is the word I leave with you. Coincidence that a child remembered details she should never have known. Coincidence that a dog happened to stop near a fence. Coincidence that fibers and footprints were found there. Stack enough coincidences together, and suddenly the state cries proof. But is it truly proof, or is it a desperate attempt to build a mountain out of pebbles? He paused dramatically, letting the words hang in the air. For a moment, the courtroom was silent. Even Sarah held her breath, afraid of what effect his speech might have. Then the prosecutor rose slowly, like a storm gathering strength. Counselor, he said, his voice measured but razor-sharp, you have given us quite a performance. But let us examine what you call coincidence. He walked to the center of the courtroom, facing the jury directly. Coincidence is a child naming a dog she's never met? Coincidence is her describing the exact location of the suspect's capture details known only to police? Coincidence is forensic evidence matching that very location? At what point does coincidence become a pattern? At what point does a pattern become truth? The jury leaned forward. The prosecutor's voice thundered now. This is not theater. This is not imagination. This is evidence layered upon evidence. A child's words. A dog's training. A scientist's analysis. Each piece alone may raise questions, yes. But together, they form a picture no coincidence can explain. The defense attorney shot up. Objection argumentative. Overruled, Judge Holloway said, his gavel tapping once. His eyes lingered on the jury, as though silently urging them to see through the fog. The prosecutor turned back to the jurors, softening his tone. The defense wants you to believe in coincidence. I ask you instead to believe in truth. Because truth is what you've witnessed in this courtroom, not through speeches, but through the innocent voice of a child and the irrefutable confirmation of science. Lily, oblivious to the gravity of the moment, tugged at her mother's sleeve and whispered, "Mommy, did I do good?" Sarah smiled through her tears. "You did perfect, sweetheart." The jurors saw it. They felt it. And though they would not speak of it until deliberations, the tide had already turned. The defense attorney slumped into his seat, his face drained of color. He knew his words had been swallowed whole by the prosecution's storm. His client leaned toward him, hissing angrily, but the lawyer only shook his head. There was nothing left to say. The judge dismissed the court for the day, but as the jurors filed out, their expressions were telling. Some carried solemn resolve, others quiet certainty. None looked at the defendant. In the hallway, reporters swarmed, their questions buzzing like angry bees. Is the case over? Will the jury convict? What role did the child's testimony play? But inside the courtroom, as silence settled once more, Sarah lifted Lily into her arms. The little girl wrapped her arms around her mother's neck, whispering, "Rex is a hero." And in that simple truth, shared by a 3-year-old, lay the weight of everything the defense could not undo. The cracks in their case had widened into chasms, and everyone knew the verdict was drawing near. The morning sun streamed through the tall courthouse windows, casting long shadows across the polished floors. It was the day the jury would deliver its verdict, and tension hung in the air like a storm ready to break. Reporters lined the hallways, cameras ready to capture history. The courtroom was packed, but the atmosphere was different from previous sessions, charged with anticipation, quiet respect, and the weight of everything that had already transpired. Sarah held Lily's tiny hand in her own, squeezing it gently. "Are you ready, sweetheart?" she whispered. Lily's eyes sparkled with curiosity, not fully understanding the gravity of the moment. She only knew that Rex, the brave dog she loved, had helped them, and that made her happy. Judge Holloway entered, the gavel in his hand. The courtroom fell silent. The jury, somber but resolute, filed in and took their seats. The foreperson, a middle-aged woman with a steady demeanor, rose. She held the piece of paper containing their decision and approached the bench. "Has the jury reached a verdict?" the judge asked. "Yes, Your Honor," the foreperson replied. Her voice was clear and calm. The courtroom seemed to hold its breath. The defense attorney straightened nervously, his hands gripping the edge of the table. The defendant's face was pale, his eyes darting nervously. Sarah drew a deep breath, her heart pounding. Judge Holloway nodded. "Please read the verdict." The foreperson unfolded the paper, clearing her throat. "We, the jury, find the defendant guilty on all counts." A ripple of gasps spread through the room. Some spectators whispered, others cried softly. Sarah's knees felt weak. She gripped Lily tightly and felt tears stream down her face. She looked at her daughter, who tilted her head innocently and whispered, "I helped, Mommy?" "You did," Sarah said, her voice breaking. "You helped so much." The defense attorney's face crumpled, and his client slumped in defeat. There was no more room for argument, no loopholes, no last-minute tricks. The case that had seemed so complex had been decided by evidence, courage, and above all, the pure honesty of a child. Judge Holloway spoke, his tone calm but weighty. "The court acknowledges the extraordinary circumstances of this case. While testimony from a child this young is unusual, the combination of her uncoached recollection, confirmation by trained law enforcement, and scientific evidence has established clarity. Justice has been served." Officer Daniels, sitting quietly in the back, allowed himself a small, proud smile. Officer Torres, Rex's handler, patted the dog on the head, a look of pride and relief crossing his face. Rex, ever calm and obedient, wagged his tail softly, unaware of the historical role he had played. The foreperson returned to her seat, and the clerk began formally recording the verdict. The room buzzed with reporters scribbling furiously, their pens moving faster than thought. Cameras flashed, capturing the reactions of all involved. Once the official procedures were complete, Judge Holloway dismissed the court. The room erupted not in chaos, but in quiet celebration and relief. Jurors whispered congratulations to one another. Officers shook hands, and Sarah lifted Lily high, spinning her gently in her arms. Outside the courtroom, a small crowd had gathered. Neighbors, reporters, and local residents had come to see the resolution of a story that had captured the community's attention. Lily, perched on her mother's hip, pointed excitedly toward the crowd. "Look, Mommy! Rex is coming." Rex and Officer Torres appeared, moving calmly through the crowd to greet their little heroine. Lily squealed with delight and ran forward, arms outstretched. Rex trotted to her, tail wagging, and she hugged him tightly. The crowd clapped and cheered, some wiping tears from their eyes at the innocence and courage of a child whose simple honesty had altered the course of a trial. A local reporter captured the moment. Lily, tiny and triumphant, arms wrapped around Rex's neck, giggling, her teddy bear dangling from her other hand. "A hero dog and a brave little girl," the reporter whispered into the microphone. Sarah looked down at her daughter, brushing a curl from her forehead. "You changed everything, Lily," she whispered. "You told the truth, and it mattered more than anyone could imagine." Lily's reply was simple, pure. "I just told what I saw, Mommy." Rex helped too. The day continued with quiet celebrations. The media dubbed Lily and Rex the dynamic duo of justice, and their story went viral nationwide. Social media exploded with admiration for the child and the K-9. Letters poured in, and strangers sent gifts and tokens of thanks. Local authorities recognized Rex for his role in the case, and the department proudly displayed a photo of Lily and Rex in the station's main office. But for Lily, the day was simple. She had hugged her favorite dog, held her mother's hand, and been part of something important. She didn't understand fame or headlines. She only understood honesty and friendship. In the quiet moments afterward, Sarah whispered to her daughter, "Remember, Lily, truth matters, no matter how small you are." "You helped people see it today." Lily smiled, resting her head on her mother's shoulder. "I like telling the truth. It makes Rex happy too." As the courthouse emptied and the sun dipped lower in the sky, there was a sense of closure, satisfaction, and awe. A case that had seemed impossible to untangle had been resolved, not through clever legal maneuvering alone, but through courage, innocence, and an unwavering bond between a child and a dog. The town celebrated their unlikely heroes quietly, honoring the role of a little girl who reminded everyone that sometimes the smallest voices carry the loudest truths. Rex, loyal and brave, had not only performed his duty as a police K-9, but had become an emblem of courage and precision. And Lily, unaware of the magnitude of her contribution, had simply been honest, observing the world as children do, with clarity, simplicity, and untainted sincerity. The story would live on in newspapers, online headlines, and local legend. A 3-year-old girl named Police Dog in court and justice is served. But beyond the headlines, it was a story of truth, trust, and the quiet power of integrity. That evening, as Sarah tucked Lily into bed, the little girl hugged her teddy bear and whispered, "Rex is my hero." "Yes, sweetheart," Sarah replied, brushing a curl from Lily's forehead. "And so are you." Outside, the stars shone faintly, as if reflecting the extraordinary events of the day. Justice had been served, truth had prevailed, and an innocent voice had changed the world one simple, courageous statement at a time. And in the hearts of those who witnessed it, the lesson endured. No matter how small, honesty and courage can alter destinies, inspire communities, and even bring heroes into the light four-legged or otherwise.